Okay, Chair, we're live.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's meeting of the Learning and Skills Scrutiny Committee, where we will be looking at the single item of business, which is the proposals in relation to Mount Street Infant School, Mount Street Junior School, and Craddock County Primary School. We'll be joined by officers as well as members of the committee. I just want to let people know that we will be joined late by two further members of the committee who have been in an employment panel meeting this morning and are currently travelling home. Two others have made it and are already in. And we will also be joined slightly late by Lynette Lovell, the director, as she was in the same meeting. Without more ado, I therefore move us on to the main business of the day, which starts with going through the apologies. So, Wyn, could you let me know who we have received apologies from?
Certainly, Chair. We've had an apology from Councillors Tim Van Rees and Claire Mills. I also need to report to the committee the resignation of Claire Mills from the committee. So I'm currently speaking to the group leader for replacement.
Thank you, Wyn. Can I also add to that, assuming he doesn't make it into the meeting, as I see he's not here at the moment, Councillor Bryn Davis, who reported to me earlier in the week that he was having problems with internet connections being stable at his property after the storms weekend before last. So he may join us, but if he doesn't, could you convey those apologies? I now turn to disclosure of matters of disclosure of any interests. If any members have an interest that they think they need to declare in relation to this discussion, please could they do so now? Okay, in which case I then need to move on to the formal disclosure of any prohibited party whips which a member has been given in relation to this meeting in accordance with section 78.3 of the Local Government Measure 2011. Again, by silence, can I take it that there have been no whips applied? Thank you, in which case I move on to our sole item of business today, which is to discuss the consultation report into Mount Street Infant School, Mount Street Junior School and Craddock County Primary School. I just remind members that after the session with officers and portfolio holder, we will be having a discussion to firm up any proposals that we are putting to the Cabinet and any recommendations. So without more ado, could I pass over to portfolio holder Councillor Phil Davis to introduce the item and to introduce the officers that are present today.
Thank you, Chair. As you've all effectively introduced the item, it is the paper that I have going to Cabinet scheduled for 14th of December. And it is, as you've outlined, with regard Mount Street Infant, Mount Street Junior School and Craddock CP School. And the recommendation is to receive the consultation report that we are about to discuss, I'm sure, and that it would be to proceed with the proposals as set out in the report. I'm quite happy to hand back to you, Chair, but we do have Emma Palmer with us, for Head of Transformation, who will be helping us with the report. We have obviously Jane Thomas from Finance, Mary Thomas from Finance, and Marianne Evans as well from Education Service, who will be helping us today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. Do any of the officers have anything in terms of an opening statement that they wish to make to us before we go to questions?
If I may, Chair.
Certainly, Emma, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So, Chair, just to bring to members' attention, obviously you're aware of the three schools this paper refers to. Ordinarily, through the scrutiny meetings, we or the scrutiny committee seek information around pupil numbers, how far they're travelling to from school, etc. So I thought I'd just start off in particular in relation to Craddock School. At the moment, the pupils that are attending Craddock School, 50.5% of those children, Craddock CP School is the closest school for 50% of the children. 24.2%, their closest school is Priory within town, then it's followed by 8.8% in Llanfaes, 5.5% Senny Bridge, 4.4% Mount Street, 3.3% Archdeacon Griffiths, and then 3.3% Bilth. So basically, for 50% of the pupils that are attending Craddock, their closest school is Craddock. The others have schools that are closer to where they live. In respect of travel distance, in case members are not familiar with the locality, the Craddock School and the furthest that a child travels to the Craddock School currently is 6.3 miles, and moving to the proposal that's on the table, should Cabinet choose that based on the existing children that attend Craddock, the furthest that a child would travel is just over 9 miles. So we're looking at approximately 3 mile difference. One of the challenges that we've received in respect of the correspondence in terms of the consultation is around why can't we build a new school in Craddock area. And the reason I've drawn those figures to your attention in respect of Craddock today, albeit that the proposal is broader and it does include Mount Street Infants and Juniors also, is because if we were to build a new school in Craddock based on the population numbers for that area, the recommendation would have to be for a new 2-class school, so for in the region of 50 pupils. And from an economic perspective, when I come on to the wider strategic intent here, that wouldn't stack up, and that would still be a small school by Welsh Government definition. With the proposal that's on the table and looking at the Penlan site, so closing 3 schools, that they continue to temporarily operate on their existing sites, we would move from 3 governing bodies, 3 leaderships to 1 governing body and 1 leadership team, subject to approvals, I hasten to add. It gives us the opportunity to develop on the Penlan site 1 school, and that Penlan site is the same location as the new Brecon High School, and it's also just across the road from Ysgol y Bannau, which is the Welsh medium primary school in the area. There's some exciting opportunities that, should the proposal go forward, and Lynette, I'm sure, would like to come in on this in terms of education, but it does create some exciting opportunities that we've not necessarily seen in Powys before in respect of transition from year 5 and 6 through to the high school with regards to the enhanced, I think, curricular activity that those children could access. And as I said, I'm sure Lynette will want to come in on that element. So from an economic perspective, and looking at this, Mount Street Infants and Junior are the only infant and junior, so 2 separate schools that we have located next to one another. They're the only infant and junior schools that we now have left within the county. And so when looking at the proposal and looking at the Brecon area in its broadest terms in respect of catchment, we've worked through the case and brought forward the proposal before yourselves and also Cabinet on the basis of the wider opportunity that this would present. Temporarily operating on 3 sites, but as 1 school, allows the new school to manage the admissions. Those admissions would be managed in a way where, dependent on the child who is applying for a placement in the school, they'd be able to determine their nearest school in terms of the 3 current sites as to whether a child would attend on the Craddock site or whether they would attend on the Mount Street infant junior element, and obviously for that, depending on the capacity elements. And then, of course, transitioning with the new school would allow the new school to work with the team to develop that new school on the Penland site. So I just felt that it was important to set some of that wider context for the committee, because I'm conscious that not everybody will be familiar with the area, obviously as you represent across the county, but just to give some context there, Chair, which I hope is helpful to the committee.
Thank you very much, Emma. Lynette, did you want to come in? I know you were referenced.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Councillor Peach. Yeah, just on a couple of those points, just to talk about the 3-site issue and the fact that it would be one governing body, one head teacher of the 3 sites. And what it does as well there, you have a broader leadership team, which may consist of deputy head, assistant head, TLRs, etc. So the leadership structure is broader for the larger school. In terms of precedents that we have in the local authority, we do have the Welsh Pool Church in Wales school, which now is in the new building, but did operate on 3 sites prior to that. So just for your information as Scrutiny there, during that time of operating on the 3 sites, there was one head teacher, assistant head teachers, deputy head teachers, but during that time, the provision improved at the school and standards improved at the school as well. In terms of the opportunities this proposal could have in terms of transition as well, we're aware that, as Emma's already said, that we've got Mount Street Infant, Mount Street Junior. This would be the last infant and junior school in the local authority. As you know, Havering and Ladywell closed this year and became Ysgol Calon y Dderwen. In terms of transition from foundation phase to Key Stage 2, and then on from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, the proposal would give the opportunity for better transitional arrangements. I'm sure that they already have good ones in place, but it would be even better going forward. In terms of transition from Key Stage 2 to 3, as Emma's already talked about on the site, there would be opportunities for those children, that years 5 to 8 transition, for them to have the facilities that are currently at Brecon High School in terms of the science lab that's there, state of the art, there's a drama studio, and we know that we have lots of opportunities there for transition going forward. So I just wanted to bring a couple of those, in terms of education, what it can mean for our learners going forward and those opportunities, and just taking us back to our transformation education vision statement, which, clearly sets out what we want the provision to look like for our learners in Powys in the 21st century, and making sure we're increasing those opportunities going forward. So thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Pete.
Thank you, Lynette. And I'm glad you mentioned the strategy, because before we move on in more detail to this proposal, I'm looking for a little bit of clarity from something that hangs over from the last meeting. And that's the statement from the portfolio holder around the ideal size that was being focused on, and the fact that in response to a question at any time, he's now made the statement, for a single form entry of 30 pupils in a primary school, the school size would be 210 learners. This would constitute a 1-class teacher per group for a section to year 6 plus the head teacher. This obviously is a response from the portfolio holder clarifying his comment, but to help Scrutiny in our discussions today, can you confirm to us, because I know when I questioned you on this last time, that you avoided this question, can you confirm that we are now looking as part of this transformation formally as an aspiration to move to schools of 210 pupils, just to help us in our deliberations on this, because it forms part of the wider Brecon cluster review?
No, I don't think that is the case. I'm sorry, Councillor Pete. I think what I was asked a question and I provided an answer that based on what would be the ideal number from my perspective, and I did say that there was my perspective from things, and that's what I believe to be correct, and that can be backed up. I mean, I know later on in the week we're discussing the new formula, and when you look at how that works, the numbers there do relate to how you can best resource a school, obviously, and then that 210 is a very real, but that isn't that's an ideal world scenario. You're never going to have that. You're never going to have an intake that always provides them that 30 class pupils. And I mean that again, is 30 children in a class ideal as well? I'm not going to get into that, but it's just a case of the context the question was asked in. I don't think that's in relation to the strategy, and that doesn't have a bearing on the it's all about learner entitlement, an equal offer of education across Powys. So sorry, I think we're getting my personal opinion coming into something that I don't think it involves with. Apologies.
Thanks for that, Phil. That's important because it was unclear in the response to the question whether that was you clarifying your opinion or whether that was you clarifying the position for things moving forward. Marianne, you I think want to come in on this.
Yeah, it's a question that's been asked many times over the years. What is the ideal size of a school for a county like Powys? And the answer is yes, there could be an ideal size of a school in terms of how many classes you would want, but actually Powys is vast. It's sparsely populated, and we need to take account of all kinds of different things, don't we, when we review schools, such as the geography, their location of the schools, language of the schools. So in some cases, a small school may be the only school for miles around, kind of thing. So there are things that we need to look at. So I would say, I hate saying it, but it's not a one size fits all for Powys, and probably not for many other counties as well. But I just wanted, just to clarify that really, Powys is unique in this instance.
Thank you, Marianne. That's helpful, because one of the lines of questioning we could be looking at today, because this is part of the Brecon Cluster Review, is that the proposals within that wider cluster review included a new school at Sennybridge, which would fall below the figure that the portfolio holder quoted in a response to a member's question. So that's really helpful and will save us time later, I think. Councillor Jake, you've had your hand up first.
Okay, thank you. And can I just thank the officers for a really comprehensive paper, 744 pages. I don't know whether that's the longest, but it felt very long in going through that, which I have been doing. Could I just, in asking this question, framing the question, could I just ask you to turn to page 191 in the pack? Perhaps if you can scroll through that, and while you're doing that, I'll just remind you what's there. It's Estin's comment that the council's assertion that the standards, well-being, provision, and leadership will all improve after this proposal goes ahead. So after phase 1 is enacted and we have one school on 3 sites with a single leadership and governance team, the suggestion is put by Powys in the papers that that will all improve. Estin has suggested that the response was rather vague. I note the response that you've made in there, and actually is pertinent. This is almost the first question, in that that's where Emma and yourselves have started this morning around this key point, and you've already started to allude to some of those improvements. But I just, before we go on any further today, I wanted to sort of ask a question as whether you would, on reflection, want to add anything to the response that you've put at page 191 there to further reassure and assure parents that there is an improvement, because of course it's not just that it's going to be good, it will be better than what they've already got is the assertion. So I have got other questions, but I think that's a really good place to start if you'll oblige me. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jake. Before Lynette answers, for anyone looking for this is response 2.1.0 of the consultation report. And if you are looking solely at the consultation report rather than the agenda pack, this is on page 101 of the consultation report, just for the benefit of anyone who might be watching us. Lynette or Emma or Marianne, I'm not sure who wants to come in on that one. Lynette.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, sorry, it was breaking up a little bit. So in terms of the provision and improved, I mean, what in response to Eston there, to give you more assurance, really, what we're looking at is in a better provision going forward, as already explained in the first part there. Provision currently on some of the sites in terms of a part of what Eston look at is the learning environment. That's part of the guidance for Eston, and the learning environment would be improved. So going forward, that learning environment, as we know from the impact assessments within the report, the learning environment currently, particularly at Craddock, there are issues there around accessibility. So inclusion would be improved. We've got issues there around, which is in the impact assessment, around the mitigations that the school currently has to put in place for safeguarding. So in terms of provision, that would be improved in a better building going forward. And as I say, in terms of teaching and learning, what we would have at the school is better provision for teaching and learning in terms of learning environment again. That transition, as I mentioned, to better facilities in science labs have already said that. So as I say, that is a big part of the Eston inspection, is the learning environment, and certainly that would be improved going forward from a situation currently that is at Craddock in particular an issue.
Do you want to come back on that, Jake?
No, I'm fine with that, but because I obviously have got the report, and your introduction did touch on it, Lynette, as did Emma. So I do thank you for that. I don't want to come back on that. I've got other questions, but I see other hands up. So if they're around this, I'll give way, and I'll try and slot mine in later.
Yeah, I know Amanda's had her hand up for a little while, but Councillor Sandra and Councillor Lucy, you've both raised your hands. If they are specifically on this point, I will take that now. Otherwise, I'll move to Amanda.
They're not specifically on this bit, mine.
Mine is concerning this, if you don't mind, Councillor Pete.
Go ahead, Sandra.
Thank you. It's relating to what's been touched upon, and my concern is the two phases. And I'm speaking from experience here, because as some know, we've had this situation down with us in the Estragonice area, and there was a period of time where the Welsh medium school was opened theoretically in line with the other English medium schools on two sites, and that meant then the head teacher had to physically move from one school to another and share time equally between. My concern is with three schools and having one head teacher, one governing body, okay, that's not too much of a problem, but I do have issues with it. If a school has a problem or an issue that needs extra support, etc., it does take the head teacher away from the other two schools, and I do have concerns in the period of time that phase will take. I'll leave it there, and I do like Councillor Jake have other questions, and hopefully I will be able to fit those in later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sandra. I think Marianne was looking like most likely to come in.
Yes, there was lots of concern, as you've read from the report, about having two phases. Phase one, which is the three schools which is the school opening on 3 sites for a period of time until they move into a new building. So there were concerns raised about why do we need the first phase? Why do we need phase 1? Why can't we just move straight into the new building? The response to that is phase 1 is actually absolutely integral to the success of phase 2. So we would need to set up a school to have a temporary governing body and a body of staff and pupils who would be able to work with us to develop the designs of the new school and to plan for the new building. So, you know, for the purposes of everybody watching this, that is the reason. We can't really do it any other way. We do need input of everybody who's going to be part of this exciting journey and moving into the new building early on. In terms of concerns about managing a school across 3 sites, as Lynette said, we have had experience of setting this up in Welshpool, and we're not going to lie, you know, it was a challenge for the authority, and it was a challenge for the head teacher and the leadership of the school and the governing body, having to manage 3 sites. And actually one of the sites in Welshpool had significant maintenance issues during that time period anyway. So it was challenging, plus the fact that we only anticipated that the school would be on 3 sites for a short period of time, for at least sort of a year or so, but events overtook things and they were on 3 sites for more than that. In terms of how the school would operate, and I'll ask Lynette to come in here, a school operating across 1 site, there would be 1 head teacher, but there would also be teachers in charge and deputy heads, etc., who would be able to share the burden. Lynette, I don't know whether you want to add in there.
Yeah, so the key part of that was when we set up Welshpool Church in Wales School, the governing body, temporary governing body was put in place, and the staffing structure was a key part of that, first of all, and making sure there was sufficient leadership across the 3 sites. So for that period of time, there were leadership posts across the 3 sites, if you like, for the 3 sites had a deputy in essence, because the head teacher could only be, as you rightly say, Councillor Sandra, in 1 place at 1 time. So that was put in place. The staffing structure was put in place, and then the school worked together to provide, you know, sort of the same uniform and things like that. That was really important. All of those decisions were really important decisions prior to getting into the new building, and actually coming together as 1 school, working through what was needed in the new build. That the governing body and the school were very involved in all of that. So it was really key that we had all of that. So support was put in place as well, just to reassure you, on the 3 sites to ensure. So for example, there were still 3 admin assistants on the 3 sites for that time. There were leadership posts on the 3 sites for that time. So through that period, the local authority worked with the school to ensure that the 3 sites could work effectively. Although Marianne says, the head teacher can't be on all the sites at the same time, but it did work effectively, and we worked together with the governing body. The local authority officers worked with them to ensure that things were put in place to make things run as smoothly as possible.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that
Yes.
point?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman, just briefly. That's reassuring what you said, and I appreciate that. Thank you. My concern is we've had COVID. We still have COVID. We don't know what the future is going to be. We've had lots and lots of different ways of working with, new computers, etc., etc. So there's been a lot going on. Plus we've got new curriculum. Plus we've got the law for ALN that has changed. So there's a host of huge demands on staff, teachers, etc. And for these youngsters in this time of turmoil, if you like, because it's upsetting for those. If we as adults can't understand COVID, I'm sure children can't. So I mean, they've got all of this going on in their little heads. Plus the fact now that they're going to be 1 school, change of uniform. I can understand the preparation ready for moving into another school. But my real bugbear with all of this is that there's no determination of the actual funding. And as you've mentioned, there were hiccups with Welshpool, so that might go on a little bit longer. I have real concerns for the staff, whoever they are. that's going to be involved with this for perhaps a longer period of time. And the costs of this, we haven't put in inflation. Mention of a swimming pool, we had mention of a swimming pool in Ystwyth, that didn't happen. There's mention of a PRU. Is that part of the funding, or is that an extra pot? There are lots of questions unanswered, and I've got quite a few concerns, but I leave it as that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks, Sandra. We're going to touch on funding and the risk associated with phase 2 in a bit. So if we can park that one just for now and just focus on the concerns around phase 1. Is there anything, Lynette, you wanted to respond to with Sandra or Marianne?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back in, Councillor Pete. Yeah, in terms of the demands that Councillor Sandra has just said on schools at the moment, we're really aware of all of that. The new curriculum is due in September 22, so that's imminent, and obviously the COVID pressures around. However, there are opportunities for schools working together. We've worked together more effectively than we ever have done before with our schools and clusters, and work moving forward, supporting for the new curriculum in our schools. We've got a team now in Powys, a new team, curriculum and professional learning, to support our schools and make sure that we are providing that support for our schools for the new curriculum. So fully agree with the amount of pressure on schools and teachers at the moment. But as I say, we can assure you that as a local authority, we are there to support all schools for the rollout of the new curriculum. In terms of the ALN Act, we're in a good place in the local authority with that. You'll have seen the recent inspection report. We've got a good team in place to support schools with all of that work as well. And just to say, in terms of support through transition as well, and the transformation programme, we have put an officer in place who is supporting our head teachers and is available for supporting through this process as well. So we have a lot that we can do to help support schools through, and whilst acknowledging the difficulties that schools are facing at the moment in terms of COVID, and how that will be going forward as well. So be assured of our support for schools.
Thank you, Lynette. Can I bring you in now, Councillor Amanda?
Thanks, Pete. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I know you're not in the best of reception areas at the moment.
No, thank you. Yeah, I've got a couple of queries. One is just on the different options that were considered. And it might be that I'm just getting some of the wording mixed up. But was there an option considered where the 2 Mount Street schools would be merged to come one and then federated with Craddock, so that there would be a federated school over 2 sites rather than a federated school over 3 sites? Is that, I can't see that in the options, but it might be that I'm getting some of the wording mixed up.
Marianne's
so that's my first
nodding.
question.
So Marianne's nodding. So can I bring her in before you go on to your second question?
I am nodding, and I'm trying to frantically find information as well. There was an option to federate and to merge Mount Street Infants and Mount Street Junior, and there's also an option then to federate or merge the 3 schools. So I'm just going to, if you bear with me, I'm going to just find my sheet. That's okay.
Yeah, so it's to have it. The one I was interested in, just the analysis of, was it being over 2 sites. So the Mount Street's one becoming 1 school, and then Craddock being federated with that school, but retaining a site on Craddock. I just wanted to read the analysis on that. But whilst you're looking for that, if I could just ask my second question, Pete, which is to do with phase 1, is that okay? Yeah,
that's fine. I was going to suggest that to give Marianne some time.
Yeah.
Obviously I don't. Yeah,
sorry. I can't answer to the first question, if that's okay, right? So there's an option 2A, federation. Mount Street Infants and Mount Street Juniors will federate to create a federated primary school in Brecon. But the option then goes on to say Craddock continues as a separate school. Then we move on. It's the same then for a merger option. And then the third one is, hang on.
But isn't that 2A, Craddock would retain its own its own status as a school in its own right?
We've got an option to federate the 3, haven't we? And an option to federate the 2, but Craddock to continue as a standalone.
Yeah, so I'm right that there's not an option where you merge the Mount Infant and Mount Junior to create one school and then federate with Craddock.
No, we haven't.
So
got
you have.
It would be too, because it was.
So then my question is, why was that not considered as an option?
Because it's two. It would have to be 2 separate processes. So you'd have to first of all merge the 2 schools. So you set up a new school, and then you'd have to carry out a separate process then to do to set up a federation. The two separate legal processes. We felt that actually that wouldn't really merging the 3 schools has, in our opinion, far better opportunities and advantages than merging 2 and then adding another one on in as a federation. It gets quite complicated and messy. So, the benefits of the merger option, in our opinion, outweigh any of the others.
I understand the reasoning, but I'm surprised that that analysis isn't given within this documentation, so that we would have a complete picture. So I'll just make that point now. But
I think Emma wants to come in, but before she does, I'm aware that this process has come out of the wider Brecon catchment review that went before Cabinet about September last year. Was this proposal that Councillor Amanda is talking about considered at that point and discounted at that point? Perhaps Emma can come in and answer my question linked with Amanda's, because I think she wants to respond to that as well.
I was just going to make the point to add on to what Marianne has already said, that if my opening statement around the Craddock element was because the one option that Councillor Amanda is referring to there about retaining Craddock and that site is, don't forget, in terms of from an economic perspective and around the case, you would be looking at a 2-class school, which would be 50 pupils based on the population in that area, which doesn't stack up when you look at an economic case against the proposals that we've put forward.
I understand the economic case there, but at the moment parents are choosing to travel beyond Priory for whatever reason to attend at Craddock, and whilst the numbers are falling, they are stable-ish between the 80 and 110 mark over recent years. I can't remember from the top of my head what they're proposed to drop to, but you're making an assumption there that with the opening of a merged school on the Mount Street site, that pupils that are currently being taken cross-catchment are not still going to be taken across catchment.
They wouldn't be taken across catchment in terms of the Craddock site. If the Craddock site wasn't there, it wouldn't be an option for that cross site element. And for those, then the children, everyone has choice, won't they? Everyone still has choice in terms of their nearest school. I know we've covered this point before in terms of it being a web. So, and some individuals may choose to attend Sennybridge instead, but I know that's a point you wanted to raise later.
Yeah, no, what I'm responding to is your statement that it would be a 2-class 50 pupil school under that. That's assuming that you are going for a new build, and that
that's
it
right.
may well be that is your reasoning why that model of that Amanda is advancing was not taken forward. I'm just trying to tease out why that was discounted, and I think we've got there, but I think to win a recommendation coming forward from us for Cabinet is that that option is specifically explored and put before Cabinet specifically so they understand why it is discounted.
Okay.
Does that fulfill your question, Amanda?
Yeah, because I think some of the other options, I can see clearly why they would be discounted, but I just would like to have seen the reasoning behind that within the documentation. And it kind of leads me on to my second question, Pete, to do with
Go ahead.
The transition phase of phase one. I don't want to use anecdotal evidence from the Welsh Pool because it's obviously different. It's going to be different here. But, we all will know that there will potentially be bumps in and things may get delayed or whatever. And we can't predict that. But in the Welsh Pool area, I'm aware of pupils that would have gone to that larger school that aren't going to that larger school now and are going to more rural schools outside of the Welsh Pool area. Now, I don't know the reasons for that, and I'm not going to speculate, but what I'm saying is, have we done a lessons learned exercise to identify whether that was caused because of having such a long transition phase, or whether because parents would rather send their pupils to a medium-sized school rather than a school with, over a few hundred pupils in, or is it because of the delay? And so what I'm concerned about is by not including the analysis of that you've just talked through now as to why you've discounted federating over two sites. Are you potentially discounting an option down the line if things don't pan out as you expect them to in terms of where pupils go? That's the sort of rationale behind my questioning. Sorry, that's a little bit convoluted, sorry, Chair, but just to sort of give you where I'm coming from.
I think I'm picking out a question there. Are there any lessons to be learned from the Welsh Pool experience in terms of how pupils might actually, how parents might actually choose which school they send their children to, and hence are we confident that all of the pupils that are theoretically transferring to this new build school at stage 2 will actually transfer? Have I got that right, Amanda?
Yeah, that's right. But in light of that, the Craddock site will be going, has it been analysed where whether or not those pupils, in light of Welsh Pool, would actually choose to go to the site in Brecon, or would they choose to go to another rural school or another school in the area other than those two? I'm just trying to sort of tweak out those lessons that could have been learned from that. Thanks, Pete.
Marianne, I think, is trying to come in.
It's very topical, actually, Councillor Jenner, because we're in the process of finalising a lessons learnt piece of work that we need to inform Welsh Government. So as part of the 21st Century Schools, we have to send in a closure report, and as part of that, we have to look at our lessons learned. But I think it's a really valuable point that you're bringing to the table here, because we're actually in the process of capturing all the lessons learned here. One thing I need to say about Welsh Pool is that the new build is in its infancy. So it only opened in January of this year. All the pupils, as far as I understand, but I will check for you, all the pupils who were in Welsh Pool Church in Wales on the 3 sites, I believe, but I will check, all transferred into the new building. I don't think that at that transition point to the new building that we lost any pupils, but I will double check that. And the reason for that is that the new school has been established for a couple of years anyway, and the staff and the teachers have worked really hard on creating one school ethos across the 3 sites previously there were disparate schools. So the children felt that they were part of one school. And then the icing on the cake was that day they opened Welshpool Church in Wales doors and the children went into the new facilities and were just beyond excited. So, and another point for Welshpool, just to clarify as well, we know from early days in the Welshpool transformation that Welshpool town schools were losing a number of pupils out of town to the neighbouring schools, to Leighton, to Gilsfield, to Buttington, etc. And this goes back quite a long time, and it's a historical thing in Welshpool, and you'd be aware of this, obviously. So in our view, we've built Welshpool Church in Wales to the size that we think it should be, bearing in mind that over time, pupils in the town, it is our anticipation that they would choose to stay in the town schools in Welshpool Church in Wales or in Ysgol Gymraeg y Trallwng rather than transfer out. So there's historical issues in Welshpool as well, which Lynette would be more familiar than I am around standards and quality of education, but going back years. So we're in this kind of early days of Welshpool Church in Wales School, but also acknowledging that there's a long history of change and issues and a number of other factors in Welshpool. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you for that, Marianne. And again, when can we have a recommendation that the stuff that Marianne promised there is available to Cabinet before they take a decision? Does anyone else have any questions around that Welshpool before I throw in one? I'll throw in one then, and that is we're looking at a new build, and we'll come on to the size of that as well. But what confidence do we have that this won't have an adverse impact on the primary schools that are already in existence in Brecon? Have we modelled the impact of this new school on those schools and their viability?
I think, Councillor Pete, if I can come in there, the way that we've done the modelling around this is we've looked at the pupils in the area, and in terms of making sure that we have sufficient places for the population moving forward. What we can't do is dictate which school people will naturally change. Hopefully there's not too much change in terms of transitioning from one school to another, but that is down to parent pupil choice. But our modelling works through on the population in the area and making sure that we've got sufficient room for the reducing population actually that sadly we're seeing in terms of demographics.
Thank you for that, Emma. I've just had a note from Councillor David Jones in the chat around the lessons learned. When do you expect that to be published, and will we in Scrutiny have sight of that?
Yes, I think we're aiming for March time for it to be completed. And yes, we're happy to share that with anybody who wants to look at it.
Okay, in which case, Wynne, can you keep a note of that, as it may be something we get to see before PERDA, or it may be something that the new committee may wish to look at after the May elections. Emma, you're looking to come in.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just to confirm, ordinarily the report of that nature is normally for us in the world of programme, project management, etc. So just giving you a caveat that some of the technical speak that may be in that lessons learned really is some of the sort of internal approach and learning from that perspective. And so what we'll need to do is just be mindful of that if it's in the public domain, that it may or may not make sense to some of the public because of the technical element of portfolio and programme management. But I'll take that hat off right now.
That's all right. I think we can accept that this is a project closure document, and therefore we'll be responding to the project itself. But if this is running over into the new committee, it may be helpful to you as officers to take the new committee through it to help them gain an understanding of the complexities of these types of merger, not least because one of their first tasks looking at how the programme is shaping up will be to consider the very, very complex proposals around the Ysgol Callum Cymru catchment. So that this may give them, if you take it through, potentially even just as a training exercise rather than a formal public scrutiny,
Yeah,
it may be beneficial to the learning process of the new committee.
Thanks, Councillor.
Right, let's focus back on to today. Councillor Amanda, did you have anything else you wanted to come back on? Your hand still up, or can I move on to Councillor Lucy?
Yeah, I'm done. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, Councillor Lucy then.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, I have a question going back to Emma's comments on the catchments. It was very useful to have that information at the outset, but I just wanted to clarify: is that based on the nearest school, the information that you've given us, Emma, or yeah, on what is that based, or is that old catchments, new catchments? And also, how does that work when, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the other school in Brecon, but when you've apparently got children travelling from Craddock to the new site, crossing through a catchment of an entirely different school. And that led me on to the question about pupils moving from one school to another. Is there a danger then of the pupils in that other school wanting to access the new site because it will be very close and maybe preferential to them to their existing site? I don't know anything about those other schools.
Thanks for that, Councillor Lucy. For clarity, I think you're referring to Priory, and this does actually open up a wider question around the school transport policy and the implications that it has for that, because as far as I can see, there will be a lot of pupils in the northwestern part of the Craddock catchment who, in order to access the schooling, Priory under the school transport policy will be their nearest school. Therefore, they wouldn't be eligible for transport to the Penland site unless you're designating that area as their catchment school. So can we have some clarity and some reassurance for the families on the southern side of the Epint that they're not going to be caught in a position where they have to send that, some of them have to send their children to Priory and some of them have to send it to the new site if they want to be entitled to free transport?
Can I come in?
By all means, Marianne, whoever's best placed.
Okay, I'll start anyways. In terms of the transport, town schools, when you've got a town like Brecon and there's a number of schools within the town, the parents' choices are, different to maybe a rural area where there's one school and that's where everybody tends to go to. So we're very mindful of that. All these children in the new school on 3 sites, we would expect would transfer into the new school building because that is the strategy. That's how we intend the whole thing to go. And they transfer into that school from day one. We would then ensure that transport would be provided for those pupils in those schools to the new site. There would be no sense in doing anything other than that. And once we have the new school, we would then redefine the catchment area. And if you remember, the home to school transport policy provides transport for eligible pupils to their nearest school, nearest or their catchment school. So obviously we would redefine the catchment area for that new school and transport would be provided. Going back to another point around where parents in the rest of Brecon could also apply for a place in the new school, and there's nothing to stop them doing that. So, that would be part of the normal admissions process as well. So we would be mindful of that. And what we need to make sure is that there's sufficient places in the school for those pupils as well.
I think that's helpful, but for the avoidance of doubt, can you give us assurance that parents, it will not just be for pupils that are transferring, but for the Craddock catchment as it is at the moment? Can you give some assurance that the new catchment will be defined such that they are not forced into Priory as the nearest school, having had this transfer? I think you can see where I'm going, that it would be very easy to end up in a position with saying, well, you're in Craddock, we're not going to transport you past Priory School, which we have to do because of the road network in order to get you to this new school. So can we have that absolute assurance and the changes to the Cabinet report to reflect that, so that those parents can have that guarantee?
Yes, because we would redefine the catchment of that new school on the Penlan area to cover the catchment area that Craddock currently serves. So yes is the answer to that.
Thank you, Marianne. Wyn, can you, when you put our report together, reflect Scrutiny's reassurance that pupils in that and parents in that particular circumstance would be protected? Councillor Lucy, do you have any further questions around that? I know you have other concerns that we're going to come on to at some point.
Nothing else around that specifically, Pete.
Thanks. Jake, I'll come back to you with the next of your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Councillor Sandra raised an important set of concerns around the interim leadership team, and I'm not going to repeat that. But my point of clarification that I'm seeking here, if you refer to page 196 of the pack again, it suggested that there were staffing adjustments to be made, and there was some understandable lack of clarity around what those changes might be. And I think we've heard a little bit more from officer colleagues this morning about one leadership team, one head teacher, etc., etc. So perhaps a little bit more flesh on the bones now. Looking at finances then, and the savings attributed to phase one of the proposals, that suggested that phase one would give rise to a saving of just £16,000 per annum. I think that's the figure I've seen. Is that exclusive of those staffing adjustments that you have referred to, or inclusive of them? And then I just want to go on and raise another point about the second phase finance, if I may, and how that's linked, but I'll leave that now.
Thanks, Jake. Is that something that Marianne, who's...
I'm going to defer to Mary if she's on the call.
Marie. She was earlier, she is now.
I am still here. Sorry, I'm not going to try turning my camera on because things are very unstable at my end, I've got to be honest. So apologies for that. So the 16,000 potential saving, that's purely down to how the formula would run for one school over 3 sites rather as opposed to 3 separate schools. So it would take out some of the duplication that would be in there now. So it would cover funding for staffing as well as other elements within the formula. I don't know if that.
No, sorry, that doesn't help me a great deal. I mean, I imagine a head teacher, for instance, is costing more than £16,000 a year. You know, I don't want to discuss HR matters on air, but if we're looking at the sorts of adjustments that were described in the opening here, with one head teacher out of 3, then I would expect the adjustment, unless we're employing more staff for phase 1, to be more significant than £16,000 a year. So I'm not at all clear about the costings that have been put in the paper to go to Cabinet.
So the way the formula works at the moment is that if it's a school over a split site, there's more generous funding, I think, then I think that's the best way to describe it than if it was a school on a single site, because it covers the premises, and yeah, that isn't. It's not a direct correlation between losing the two head teachers effectively. I mean, you know, that's sorry, not wanted to get into the detail of the HR side of it either, but it's not a direct correlation with staffing.
I think Jane wants to come in and possibly to clarify this.
Yeah, just, I mean, Mary said that the funding from the authority is obviously driven by the formula. That formula will be worked up differently when you combine all of those pupils from those three schools, and it would generate an allocation that obviously is different to each individual school. It is then down to the governing body to look at its allocation and decide on the staffing levels and so on that it wants to put in place to be able to then deliver what is required to meet the needs of those pupils and deliver the educational provision for them. So we don't cost the changes in terms of staffing levels as part of this, because the cost associated with the authority is the formula only. The other changes will be accommodated by the school, and they may use, you know, they may save, as you've already said, from not having three head teachers, and they can then utilise that funding across other areas of the school.
So to be clear, what happens is that the funding formula gives an increased amount, and there might be in-year savings on the individual schools depending on, or the combined three schools, depending on the governing body's decisions around staffing levels.
Yes, but in this instance, there's a slight saving on the formula allocation, so a slight reduction as opposed to the three schools together, individually rather.
Okay, Pete, is it all right if, because I mean, funding is quite, and money is quite important, and I did want to go on because of the vagaries here to seek some explanation about the overall savings and costs associated. But if you want to take that in a different way, I'd
like to take that in a slightly different way, because I want to explore this one a little bit further. Because on Friday, we are going to be looking at the funding formula changes that will come into effect during this transition phase. We're at the moment talking about the savings in respect of these proposals based on what is now, but I'm rather hopeful that Marianne will be able to tell us what the savings are based on the modelled proposals that are coming before us and which will apply within the transition phase to give us some assurance that these savings actually carry through under the new model as well. Are you able to do that for us?
I think I'll defer again to my finance colleagues, but just to say, we have included in the papers the fact that we will need to recalculate because of the, you know, if the new funding formula is approved by Cabinet. Mary, Jane, do you want to come in?
Yeah, if I start, yes, the change in the formula will have an impact on the detailed figures, but I'd expect the order of magnitude not to change significantly. As Marianne said, we will be rerunning all of our costings on this once, but obviously we can't do that until or if the new formula is actually approved. So we haven't been able to do it as yet.
Okay, that doesn't reassure me, I'm afraid. I think as we are so close to that, I would expect at least a figure saying if the proposals as going before Cabinet are approved, this is what the impact would be. because looking through the report that we're going to discuss on Friday, there's some quite fundamental changes there that may lead to a significantly higher saving potentially. And I would hope, obviously we're not going to have them today to be able to discuss them, but again, a recommendation I think from us is that those figures are available to Cabinet as indicative figures if the proposals as advanced to them in the Cabinet paper were to be implemented, that those figures should be available to Cabinet so that they are fully informed before they make this decision.
Yes, yeah, we can do that. Definitely.
Thank you for that, Mary. Jake, I am going to focus on the bigger costs, but I want to take that as we look at the development of the new site as a whole, because there are quite a few questions around that I have and I think others have. So unless you have another follow-up, can I move on to Sandra? Councillor Sandra.
Thank you, Councillor Pete. Can I ask a question regarding early years, please?
Yes, because that's on my list of things to ask.
Thank you. With the new ALN Act, we are now responsible for youngsters from the age of 0 to 25. My concern is that in 2 of the existing schools as they stand at the moment, in Mount Street Infants, 56 places are available. We don't know how many of those are actually taken up. And in Craddock, it says 19 places. And again, we don't know how many of those are taken up. My concern is that in the new build, there is no mention of early years or provision. So what will happen to those youngsters, please? Thank you.
Okay, can I come in there?
Yes.
In terms of the new build, it's going to be a 360 pupil school, but with additional early years facilities as well. So 360 plus early years. And going back to Welshpool again, and obviously it's all dependent on individual areas and number of places and demand, etc. But we have built in 2 early years spaces for Welshpool Church in Wales, which is also a 360 pupil school. But obviously we will be working with the providers here to look at the provision and look at what's needed. But we wouldn't. In all our new school builds, we do build in early years provision. It's integral to the journey of every family and every pupil. So we will be taking that forward.
Thanks, Sandra. Do you want to come back on that? Otherwise, I'm going to ask a question.
Yes, please, Councillor Pete. Can I ask regarding the number of places? Are they all taken up? Do we know how many youngsters that there will be needing to go in there in the new school?
Well, Councillor Sandra, I haven't got that information to hand, but I will have it for Cabinet on Tuesday, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Pete.
Thanks, Marianne. I'm going to focus on the provision at Craddock at the moment. It's a long time since I've been in Craddock, but if I read the documents right, closure of the school and use for another purpose would remove the last community facility in the village and leave the playgroup there without any accommodation. Have I read that correct, firstly? And what plans do we have to put in place to enable provision of that facility within the village? Because that will be, well, it's a double hit. There's now no community facility and there's no playgroup going forward. So what plans do we have to address both of those issues?
Yeah, you'll have read the community impact assessment regarding this proposal and the potential impact on Craddock, and the school obviously being very important facility for the area. The answer, I think, that I'd suggest would be we would work with the community to see if there was an alternative to sort of maintaining some level of facility within Craddock. We've done it before with other schools that have transferred to communities. So that would be something we'd look at, and because it's not going to happen immediately, there is time to have those discussions with the local community councils, etc., and see what can be done. I am mindful that the preschool setting is also using the space as well, the school as well, and discussions are needed there to see if they could remain there on site as well. So all in all, we just deal with the matter as we deal with all disposal of school assets, or disposal of assets anyway. But there is an opportunity for us to have those conversations.
Yeah, I'm very mindful of the disposal of assets because of the what is happening in my own ward at the moment with regards to the day centre, and this obviously there would be an attraction here as well for this site to be reused for additional affordable social rent housing. Obviously, bringing those proposals forward, that would increase the numbers of housing in the village. And I would highlight at this point, with education and with housing, if they do go down that route, to look at any model coming forward includes the provision of a community asset, such as a hall that the playgroup could move into to protect the cohesion of the community there. But that's just something to highlight and is something for another committee. If we do lose that provision though, I'm aware, I'm seeing it in the chat, that members of the committee that are local to that area are saying that there is pressure on early years places in Brecon at the moment. Can you give assurance to Cabinet, either through this meeting or in the response to scrutiny, that these proposals will not decrease the available number of early years places within the Brecon and Craddock catchment areas?
As a minimum, we'd have to look at replicating what's currently being provided and the places available within the new school build. And I say as a minimum. Obviously, there is another tendering round to go through it as well in terms of allocating early years provision to the early years providers. So there's a lot of things that'll be happening between now and the opening of the new build. But it is our commitment that early years facilities and excellent early years facilities are part of the new build.
Okay, so again, can you note for our report that Scrutiny have received assurance that there will not be a loss of early years places as a result of these proposals? Sorry, a loss of the number of early years places as a result of these proposals, just to clarify. Margaret, do come in.
Yeah, just a quick question, really, that is not connected with early years at this moment, but goes back to finance. Because of the savings that we were talking about with the proposal on 3 sites at this interim stage on 3 sites, I just wanted to know, having had the experience of it not actually being costed before, but with a different phase of education, there would be movement between the sites, looking at all the documents, because it would be important for people to move to the other site, which is a distance away on occasions, both for time, staff for time, and for cost. Has that been factored in when we've looked at the savings, etc.? Is that because it's over and above the school funding formula?
Before Mary comes in, can I just jump in there? We haven't factored in any travel costs between sites, because we don't expect too much travel between sites in terms of staff. Obviously, there'll be occasions when the staff need to come together as a group, and we recognise that. But in reality, it would really be the head teacher who has to be move around on the different sites. So we haven't factored that in. Mary, can you either add to that or correct me? Or
no, you're absolutely right. The saving for phase one in particular is purely the formula savings. As Marianne said, we're not anticipating a significant amount of travel between sites, not on a regular basis.
Right. It's just that as part of your arguments for the improved educational of the children, it is that you can use the expertise of all the staff in various ways, which would include moving and supporting or working on another site, I would imagine. And that is one of your major arguments in the document.
I think there, don't know if Lynette's with us. I think yes, there would be times when the staff have to come together in order to develop their professional learning, in order to share expertise, etc. But there are other ways of doing it, as we now know, in terms of how we communicate and how we work today anyway. But and the other thing as well is these schools, whilst they're 3 separate sites, 2 of them are next door to each other, and one is, within a few miles. So
I appreciate that, but
I hear what you're saying, but I think it's a combination of things. We'd be using different ways of getting the staff together. Anyway, I don't know, Lynette, do you want to add there?
Yes, thank you, Margaret. It's a valid point. I mean, obviously, with the Welsh Pool situation there were times when I know the whole school wanted to get together as a whole school to be able to work together. They, for example, going to the church there in Welsh Pool as a whole school so that they could, get that identity as a whole school, and also for staff training and professional learning, and as you say, for that expertise across different schools and sites. And we did work there, and again, there is a benefit in all of that. And I think that we could assure you that we would be working with the schools as they transition and supporting them in whatever ways we need to, be that in training, curriculum support, be it in the extra staff that may be required for a time. All of that were things that we undertook, and we would be supporting during that transition phase the school to ensure that all of that could take place, because it is beneficial and really important for the school going forward that they have those times to work together as one whole staff. Just to say, different to when it was Welsh Pool, which is a few years ago now, as Marianne has said there, we do have different ways now with the world that we're living in terms of much of our staff training. For example, now for inset days, our curriculum team and all the rest of it are working on online training that teachers can access together at various times. And much of the training, even at individual schools this year, has been undertaken online. So we have all of those facilities now to support the school as well, to be able to work together. Nothing, it is far more beneficial to be face-to-face and sharing that expertise, but certainly it's something that we would support the school with as it's established and as it transitions during that period as well. So you can be assured of our support in that area as well.
You done, Margaret? Okay, thanks for that. I don't have any more raised hands at the moment. So I want to move on to the risk around phase 2. We are talking about a new build, and we're talking about a location which has raised a number of issues within the consultation process. Issues around the slope up to the site, the exposure of the site, the absence of the mature forest school aspect that is cited at both of the other schools. So I've seen the responses in the consultation, but I'd like you to expand on those a little bit more, to give us some reassurance about how you actually plan to address some of those concerns.
Okay. Right, I'll come in. There were a number of concerns raised about the site. One of the issues for the Mount Street in particular, especially Mount Street Infants, were the fact that it would, because it's up the hill, if anybody knows Brecon, it's situated up on the hill, that it would be more difficult for young mothers, pregnant mothers, grandchildren, grandfathers, etc., grandparents to walk their children to school as they do now. One of the things that we have to consider and put in place as part of developing any of the new schools is active travel routes and safe routes to school. So from the beginning, so once if a decision is made on this proposal, then we would start the work on the feasibilities of that site. And the council has an active travel officer, and we'd be engaging with that active travel officer from the outset to work through what options were possible in terms of developing routes to the site, to the school. There are grants available, active travel grants available as well, which we would be applying for to support that element. It is an issue, and we acknowledge that it is a real concern for those parents. But again, and I think this is the reason why sort of phase one is important. We do need to have the opportunity to engage with the school and school community from an early stage in order to understand their concerns and to sort of help mitigate those concerns and take the parents along with us on this journey. So that's number one. Number two, I'm going to forest schools. I've been to Mount Street Infants and I have to say they have got a fabulous, mature forest school area. So I can see the concern from the schools that they won't have the same type of outdoor learning environment as they currently have. And we acknowledge that. However, in all our primary school builds, outdoor learning is as important as for the curriculum as indoor learning is. So we look to make sure that the outdoor space is functional and good for children, for their not only for their play, but also for their education, for their well-being. There are numbers of ways of developing forest schools or forest school environments, but I have to say they may not be as nice or as good as was currently being developed in these schools, because they've been there for a number of years, and mature woodland, etc. in some of these. So, but it is definitely something we would look at, and again, that's why we need the phase one. That's why we need to be engaging with the school communities to sort of develop, to understand their needs around the forest school area and outdoor learning, and how we would then be able to provide them with that. Lynette.
Thanks for that. I'm just going to follow up before I bring Lynette in. We've got a School of Banai up on that site already, so we almost certainly have some data, and I know it draws from a wider catchment than Brecon itself. But how many pupils are we seeing regularly using active travel measures to get to a School of Banai from Brecon, or are their parents all bringing them up in their cars? Because surely we should have that information already available to us to respond to this. And likewise, how successful has that school been in developing a forest school type environment, given that isn't exactly the calmest of locations when it's windy? No,
I can get that data for you, so we'll bring that to Cabinet around the School of Banai. And you're quite right, the School of Banai serves a wider area with pupils coming in from a much wider area. But we can find out what the transport routes, what active travel routes parents are taking for those parents who live in the Brecon town itself. So we'll do that.
Thanks for that. I'll bring Lynette in, but Councillor David you are a Brecon councillor, and I saw your hand come up as I made that comment. So I think you have something specific to contribute. So can I bring you in with your comments, and then Lynette, you wanted to respond and add to what Marianne has said.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, the active travel route, or the safe route to schools, whichever way you want it, is going to be an absolute challenging one if the school is put on the old Brecon High School site. There's no two ways about that. I'm really concerned. I mean, there is another pathway up, but it's not a very well lit pathway. I certainly wouldn't want to see infant and junior pupils using that route. We did have an unfortunate incident only last week where a gentleman in the town was carrying a knife, caught carrying a knife, which was only in a couple of 100 yards from Mount Street School. I mean, it was just one of those things that happened. But I think we've got to be aware of that, even in small towns like Brecon, these things are happening. And what could be regarded as a safe route is not a very well lit route. It's not very well lit for high school pupils, and even more so, you know, I'd worry more about especially infant pupils utilising that route. If you use the main road, you've got the Brecon Hospital on that route. The pavements are narrow; they're not wide. At the top of that now, we've got a housing development that wasn't there before. There's quite a major roundabout that was created for the development to happen, and that makes it even worse, really, with the amount of traffic that is going around. We try to reduce the speed of it, but you know, speed limits are not monitored, so that is a real worry. I'm equally concerned, Chair, if I can utilise the time, that there has been no response from Mount Street Junior School. Is that right? That the governing body there have not responded to the consultation exercise? I assume there were meetings there, but when there were comments back, it didn't appear to be any from that particular school. But the safe route to the schools and the location of the school for the younger element in Brecon is of major concern to myself.
Thank you, David. Marianne, if you want to respond to David or myself, and then we'll bring Lynette in.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I hear all your points, Councillor David, and we will take these things into account. As I said, because we haven't started any work on this project, it'll be really important that we use, you know, we do the feasibilities, and we have the traffic assessments, and we have the safe routes to school assessments, and everything else that goes with that early stage of planning a new school build, and we will do. Can I just say, in terms of Mount Street Juniors School, we met with the governors, the staff, and the pupils of Mount Street Junior Schools, and the minutes are in the consultation report. But I don't think we received a direct response from the governors themselves to the consultation, but we definitely had meetings with them, excellent meetings.
Thanks. Lynette, you wanted to come in a little while ago and...
No problem. I don't know whether the moment's passed, but I just wanted to mention a little bit more about Forest School, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah.
I'll be quick. Just to say that obviously outdoor learning is an integral part of the foundation phase and will be an integral part of the new curriculum as well going forward. And we recognise the provision that's currently at Mount Street Infants, and I know recently a minister, I think, came to visit there and see that outdoor provision. But just to say as well that Forest School teaching and learning is a very important part of highly skilled practitioners. There's highly it's high level of training to be a Forest School practitioner, so all that skill set is in amongst the staff there as it stands. In terms of provision for Forest School in new builds that we have, it's integral to all of the planning that we make sure that outdoor environment is fit for purpose. For example, again, we mentioned Welsh Pool, but it's a similar situation. Their Forest School provision has improved considerably in the new build. They've got a bespoke classroom for Forest School activities. I visited it, and it really is a very good facility. So all of that is considered in going forward. So I just wanted to reassure you that outdoor learning and forest school provision will be considered as part of the planning process going forward.
Thanks, Lynette. David, do you want to come back quickly, and then I'll go to Jake?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just that under phase 2, it just says that a new school building on a new site in Brecon. Why do we not mention the site in phase 2? And the other side of the coin is as well, I know this is going to be developed perhaps on the old Brecon High School site, but of course the college is opposite that at the moment, but the college is looking to move down into the town itself from the buildings there. So we don't know what development is going to go around that site as a whole, which again has got to be, of concern. What will happen to the Neathport Talbot site if it all moves down into the town of Brecon?
Thanks for that, David. I'm going to bring Jake in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, in many respects, what we're seeing, given the configuration and condition issues that officers have highlighted with Craddock School in particular, some of the schools here, this looks like quite an exciting project. We talk about transformation and modernising, and certainly if phase 2 is delivered, which is where we want to go, that's the whole rationale for starting this, then it looks fantastic. Councillor Peters sort of touched upon some of the risks associated with this and looking at the site, but mine is a bit of a broader concern, I suppose, in relation to delivery, because it strikes me that almost the least best option is phase 1, because we will have disrupted the children in their other environments, put different arrangements in place, and still only saved £16,000 a year from school budgets. So a lot of change for very little financial gain, and that's about as big as it got from what you were telling me earlier. So then if I follow the logic that's in the report, if we are lucky enough to get Welsh Government 21st century funding at the usual rate, which is, I understand it's 65%, then we would anticipate savings in the order of something like £200,000 per annum, I think, so on budgets like for like. But there are some additional borrowing costs at that 65% rate, which to my rough calculations, and I know Jane will jump in if I get this wrong, of about £175,000 at 3.5 million. And therefore, it strikes me that we're getting just £25,000 savings with the new project, albeit we'll have a super new school delivering all of the things that you have anticipated there. But of course, because this isn't funded, and we've talked about having to go through an evaluation process and planning and all of the rest of it, if for some reason we either decide as a council we can't afford it, or something else happens midway, we're going to be stuck with phase 1. To what extent in the risk assessment is this a perceived risk? And to what extent is it a perceived, to what extent is it a perceived risk that we don't get the money, so we don't get Welsh Government funding? Because of course, if we don't, then this will be a net cost to us, not a net saving. So if you could just talk through some of the risks, perhaps more than you do in the report, please, that would be really, really helpful for me. Thank you.
Go ahead, Emma.
Thanks, Councillor Pete. I'll probably do a double act with the 151 officer, because I know Councillor Jake wants to pick up on the money, but if I can pick up on the first part first. I'm so pleased you used the word, you know, in terms of exciting. I'm really quite excited about the opportunity that this presents, and I want to go back to being a year 6 pupil in the science labs with a Bunsen burner, etc. You can just imagine how exciting that would be. But I think one of the things that's really important, and you made reference to the money on phase 1, with the way that we've approached transforming education, it's not all about the money. The first thing we said was around the learner entitlement. Money does have a place to play, but you know, the £16,000 reference is sort of neither here nor there really in the scheme of things, and the sorts of monies that we're dealing with on a multi-million-pound programme, although every penny does count. So I appreciate there's a slight contradiction of myself there. We're not envisaging a huge disruption for the pupils, so I'm afraid I do have a different view there, in so much as the change in phase 1 really is around governance. And yes, okay, you'd have one head teacher, you'd have one governing body, but on the ground, the children shouldn't really see a difference in respect of operating it within their existing sites and the education that they're receiving, and that's something that we need to remain as seamless as possible. And by the time we get to a position whereby phase 2 is developed, and that should be rather exciting for the children and the opportunities that brings. And much of that is about how we sell it to the children as well, isn't it? Around what is exciting and sort of seeing things through their eyes. So I don't believe that phase 1 will be as disruptive to pupils as some people may think, because of everything I've just said. In terms of funding, so we have 21st Century Schools funding already. We have one element Band A left, and we have Band B. We've got slippage within the Band B programme. Now, within the Band B programme, Welsh Government are expecting us to spend 80% of our funding before we go and ask for any additional monies. So there's a difference here. We're not asking Welsh Government for extra money. We're just saying we want to allocate the money that you've already allocated in the total sum to these particular projects. And so today we're talking about the Brecon area, so a school for Craddock and Mount Street infants and juniors. From my perspective, in terms of Marianne and the team putting that before Welsh Government, that is a small risk. We do it all the time. It's standard practice, and it's something that they will support in terms of I'm very sure about in terms of the overall Band B. That said, until we've got that confirmation, we have to put the risk before you and Cabinet, because it's only right and proper that we do so. And that's where Jane will come in. But this is standard that we do for any school, and any proposal that we've taken forward in respect of Band A and Band B. And then the other element in terms of the funding around that, again, the same for any school that's been built in Powys, or actually anywhere else in Wales. As you go through, I'll use a technical term, the REBA stages, and you move through in terms of until you get to full business case and that's approved, there's always a question mark around the finances, where you've got a ballpark figure, and the further down that process you go, the tighter it gets in terms of finance. And within the figures that have been presented today, I think it's 25% optimism bias and risk element is included in those initial figures. The alternative, if worst case scenario, we didn't get the money from Welsh Government, and the allocation within our existing envelope, worst case scenario is that we would have to fund that completely ourselves. So you're right in terms of, it'd be 100% instead of an intervention rate at 65%. That then for the organisation would mean that we either have to borrow more money, or we have to sell more assets, or we have to do a bit of both. That's what that means in practice. There's another component here as well, where Welsh Government have announced net zero builds, And so this would fall into that category. However, Welsh Government, as it stands, although hopefully this intervention rate would increase further, we'll have to lobby and speak to them, but there's an additional 10% for net zero. I don't know yet whether that's enough or not in terms of what a net zero build really looks like, and hence why we need to keep that dialogue going, Welsh Government. But there is another 10% on the table and available in respect of that. So with all of that in the round, I think the risk is minimal. The alternative is the status quo of needing to build in backlog maintenance costs, which actually still doesn't give you an infrastructure for the future. It's just bringing what you've got up to a particular standard for today. It doesn't mean that that's something that will serve you for the next 60 years in terms of lifetime costs. It gets rather technical, and I'll hand over to Jane, but I'm hoping I've answered your question in part, certainly. Thank you.
Emma, before Jane comes in, you said there has been slippage in Band B. Would I be right in assuming that means that certain projects haven't gone forward at this point, and you would be transferring finance from that? In which case, which are those projects, or have I misunderstood?
No, I've used the wrong word. We have allocated. We unallocated. I should use the word unallocated rather than slippage. Sorry, Councillor Pete. There's unallocated money in Band B that we can utilise, so we can allocate it to this proposal. Right,
that's fine. I was just worried we were deferring investments elsewhere, and that there would be costs deferred. Jane, you wanted to come in because I think this is at the crux of a lot of concerns that I have had about not just this project but a number of other projects, and that's the cost on the revenue budget, because we see these massive savings on the education budget, but there are revenue costs of the borrowing of these new builds. In Finance Panel, you couldn't give me assurance, but can you give me some assurance around what the exact costs to the revenue budget will be, assuming, of course, that things run to budget?
Yeah, thank you. I think Emma's covered lots of it in what she's described. So, but I will pick up on those points more specifically. So, yeah, as the report sets out, depending on whether we gain that approval from Welsh Government to utilise that Band B funding, which I just want to reiterate that I think the risk of that not being given is low. I agree with Emma there, and I think in terms of the principles and the guidance and what they're looking for in terms of the projects that they fund under that scheme, this meets a lot of those. So I think there is a low level of risk, but there is obviously a risk when somebody else is making an approval. So we have to point that out to everybody. In terms of the funding for that, then, with an intervention rate of 65%, the council would be looking for £3.5 million to support this project. And if we were to use borrowing only to fund that, then yes, that would have an impact on the revenue budget of £175,000 per annum. Now, that is currently accommodated within our capital programme because we knew we had this allocation there, so we would have worked that up already. So that's included in the programme as it currently stands. If we don't get that approval and we have to fund a full 100% of the project, then we would be looking at £500,000 per year revenue cost to fund if it was all from borrowing. I say if because at the moment we are looking across the council at developing a different funding strategy for our capital schemes. We are looking at all aspects. You've pointed out already that there are revenue savings generated by some of the changes we've put in place, and until now that money has been left within the delegated budget. I think that's a discussion to be had with wider council as we move through the budget planning process as to whether some of that could potentially be released to fund borrowing costs, but that's part of a wider conversation. We are also, we don't currently have significant capital receipts build into our financing strategy because we've been utilising those for transformation through the capitalisation directive. That changes now in March. So again, we're considering the potential use of capital receipts to support some of these costs, which would take down the borrowing requirement. So there's a lot happening. What I've set out in this report is the worst case scenario in terms of the council having to find that funding. And I am comfortable at the moment that for this project and its inclusion in the capital programme, it is affordable within our current capital programme and what we've worked through there. So I don't have any issues in terms of approval of this project at this stage, but all of those opportunities will still be looked at.
Thanks, Jane. I accept the caveats and the uncertainty. This is part of the wider Brecon business case, which also includes Sennybridge. There's a new build there. Am I right in thinking that that is also considered within Band B, and therefore, as Emma pointed out in the chat, factored within the MTFS, or are the costs at developing the site at Sennybridge additional costs and outside of the MTFS?
They're not part of the report that we're considering today. I don't have that detail to hand to know specifically around that, but they don't feature in terms of the costings that you've got here.
I appreciate that. The point is that this is the school's code implementation of the Brecon plan, and we haven't looked at models that involve Sennybridge in this reorganisation, but the costs on the budget are included that. So I think Emma's wanting to come in to clarify where the funding is coming from for the Sennybridge school as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So Jane's absolutely right. It's not specifically part of this proposal before you today. So we've got the 151 officer comment obviously on today's proposal.
Yes.
Separately, then I can say with in terms of programme element, what we're looking to do is get the greatest value out of the schemes going forward and within the existing Band B programme. So we would look to maximise within the funding envelope that is available. We're still working through that in terms of feasibility at the moment. So we haven't got absolute figures to bring before Cabinet and Scrutiny right now, but it's absolutely our intention to work within the envelope of Band B.
Okay, that's important, because obviously we need, as we go forward as a council looking at the budget setting, we need to have the assurance that the whole of the Brecon catchment review is factored into the existing MTFS, and that there aren't additional costs coming down the line when we come to the budget setting. So not for today, but for Jane, I will be looking at that when it comes to the capital programme for the next budget.
Just to be very clear, Councillor Pete, because the proposal today is about the primary provision, what's not included within the proposal today is the PRU leisure element. So just to be clear on that, because you just referred to the whole of Brecon area, the proposal today is for Craddock and the Mount Streets.
Yes, I accept that. There are other implications, and they are part of the budget process.
Thank you.
Thank you. That gives me some reassurance. Councillor Lucy, Councillor Sandra, Councillor Lucy first.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question about the immediate maintenance of the existing buildings, and anything that needs to be done if the new building's not going to be available for several years.
Yeah, I'll come in there. We'll continue to maintain them. Any issues, we will continue to fund and repair and do whatever needs to be done. I hate going back, as I said earlier, to Welshpool, but we were spending on one of the sites in Welshpool in the last term before they were transferring into Welshpool, into the new build, just because the things was, there was such significant issues that the school couldn't run unless we address them. So it is one of these things that we commit to. Whilst we've got pupils in schools, we will maintain those schools right up until the day that they move into new buildings.
Thank you. And Councillor Sandra.
Thank you, Councillor Pete. Emma has actually answered one of the questions I had regarding the PRU and the swimming pool, so I won't address that one, thank you. But my concern is that the existing schools have had a lot of help and support from the community. I'm assuming that the mature environment area that they've got, I'm sure that parents and neighbours, etc., were involved in helping to develop and maintain that. So there is money that has come from outside of the education pot, if you like. And my concern is that on page 50 of the report, it says that any savings will be reinvested in the council's corporate budget. And surely this needs to be addressed. Money was initially for education and should remain in education. And I would like, Mr. Chairman, that from this committee that we address that, because we are always saying that there's not enough money in the education pot. Yet when the assets are being sold, they go into the corporate pot. And if it came back into education, perhaps we'd have a little bit more money to enhance this scheme. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Sandra. Jane, I've seen your hand jump up there.
I just want to draw everybody's attention to my comment in the report, because this issue was raised by the Schools Forum about how they felt that any savings generated through transformation should be reinvested in the service. I don't think that the council should commit to that, and I'll explain that why, and it's not at a loss to education, I can assure you of that. Obviously our planning timetables are very tight. We don't know what we're getting from Welsh Government only on an annual basis. So the council has to look at all of its budgets as it plans for the following year. Now that will hopefully change a little with 3-year settlements being what we're expecting this year. So that will give us a bit of a longer sight into the future. But that being said, the way that we plan our budgets, we are clear about the full cost of delivering each of our services. So where we have costs and pressures within the school's delegated budget, those are recognised in our planning, and they are also considered in full as part of that budget planning process. So by not making a commitment to reinvest, it does not put schools at a disadvantage. In fact, the way that we've planned over the last few years has actually seen more investment going into schools in the last financial years than what's been saved through the transformation project. So it's not something that will ensure that schools get more than their fair share of the money anyway. So I just wanted to point that out, and I think it's right and proper that we do consider the whole of our budgets for all services at that corporate level and utilise those resources in the most appropriate and effective way.
Thank you, Jane. Do you want to come back on that, Sandra, or can I move on to Jake?
Just very quickly, if I may, and I don't want to put anything out on air, because I understand that members of the public are listening to this. There is something that I am very much aware of, and as far as inflation and that is concerned, when new buildings are being built, there are, as a result of inflation and unforeseen circumstances, cuts that are made to the actual buildings, and promises are then not kept. And I just wanted to share that, and I'm speaking from experience, and some of the officers will know what I'm speaking of, and which is sad, and as I'm not going to wear this online here, but I think we need to take more consideration into inflation. We don't know what's happening with COVID, and the communities, if they feel aggrieved with something that's happening, they need to have the honest truth from everybody really regarding what can and can't be delivered, so that they have the whole picture. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Sandra. Councillor Jake.
Yes, Councillor Pete. I did put something in the box there, and it's just around understanding a little more clearly where the Sennybridge proposal does sit in relation to these changes, and I'm wondering whether it is perhaps in relation to the Welsh language provision, in that these changes are completely neutral in respect of that, but appears that additional Welsh language provision would be available in the Sennybridge proposals that are here. But I'm assuming there's no codependency, that a decision today or by cabinet isn't dependent upon what happens in Sennybridge, but is what happens. Is Sennybridge dependent upon these changes, or are they completely separate? So perhaps just because it is referred to, but in my view, not quite clearly enough, could you just explain that relationship so I don't, I'm less confused after the meeting? Thanks.
The way I look at it is, the proposals for Sennybridge, proposals for this proposal, all started their life as one programme business case when we looked at the Brecon catchments, and because there were different things needing to happen with both proposals. Obviously, consultation is key with this one. The work on Sennybridge has already started in terms of feasibility and sort of into developing the concept designs, etc. If the decision is to proceed with this one is then catching up, so to speak, with where Sennybridge is. Neither dependent on each other. So should this proposal not go forward, then we can continue with the project in Sennybridge. That's fine. And yeah, the other way as well. So, but what we really want to do is to make sure that they do catch up, and that we can get the best value out of, treating them as one package. So for procurement purposes, etc., we can get, we can get better. What's the phrase? Bang for our buck for our bang, whatever it is. Yeah, by combining both and going to the market with one package. So that's ideally what we'd like to do. In terms of the Welsh language, sorry, I've just addressed that one as well. The project in Sennybridge is for a dual stream school. Although we have alluded in our West that it is one of the areas that we will be looking at going forward as well. But at the moment, nothing's dependent. The building is not dependent on any changes to the language.
Thank you, Chair. I'm more than happy with that particular response, but something Marianne said just triggered another question, if I might just leap in before Councillor Michael, and that's regarding yes. The making the project so much bigger. When I fully endorse that. I would probably do exactly the same thing myself with that, if of course it can be achieved, bearing in mind that our track record with really large projects, perhaps might be looking at Welsh School for instance, hasn't been that great. And so if we're looking at lessons learned before we embark on another what will be incredibly complex combined project across those two sites in Sennybridge, etc., are we going to learn from that? How are we going to learn from that? Yeah, okay, cheers.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair, I've got to come in. I don't think that's a fair comment at all, because I do think that the transformation team have delivered a fairly large project in Brecon that was actually, to time, to budget, to, as near as we can possibly talk about. And of course, the Gwynafod schools were successful. The issue with Downess in Welshpool was not one of our making. And I think, credit where credit's due, the transformation team have actually delivered quite a lot of significant programs of change over the last several years. And I just think we need to be mindful of some of the comments we make that are sometimes not appropriate. But I'll take flak on things like a Gaia, but I'm not having it when it comes to the school builds that have been a success, and also even with Ysgol Gymraeg y Trallwng, that they were matters outside of our control, with the listing of a building, etc. And we could talk about that all day, couldn't we? But I just think a little bit of respect, and thank you, Marianne. I think you have done a cracking job with the team over the last several years. So apologies for that.
Thanks, Councillor Phil. I think we are all aware that things can come out of the blue that we're not expecting. there are things that we can contingency plan for, and we definitely, as you've mentioned, Guy, need to do better at contingency planning. There was a question, I think, in there at the end from Councillor Jake that you were going to respond to, Marianne.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's eggs in one basket kind of scenario, isn't it? If we were to procure one contractor basically for the two schemes, ideally that would give us better value for money. However, bearing in mind what has happened with Donis, we would have to be very, very diligent about the procurement strategy going forward. But essentially, it would deliver us a better value package to go for one procurement path. We'll come to that when we'll come to it. I think that's what we're saying, but it is a risk that we do recognise.
And we'll have the report that we talked about earlier in lessons learned from Welshpool before we get to that point in any case, so that will help. Councillor Michael, and then unless anyone else has any questions, I have a final question to round things off.
Thank you, Chair. In short, and although this I'm going to be asking now, maybe in some report or other, yes, we always have a very in-depth costings, etc., for the new builds. But what I would like to see is equally strong costings of maintaining the status quo. Because although something may appear, something new may appear to be expensive, maintaining the status quo may be even more expensive in the long term and do an injustice to our learners. Could I just perhaps the portfolio holder or whoever assure me that we will have these, or Jane Thomas, that we will have these strong costings of maintaining the status quo as opposed to the costings of new builds? I'm obliged, Chair, and I will endeavour to lower my hand.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I will now.
Thank you, Councillor Michael. I know there was stuff in the original Brecon business case around maintaining the status quo, and that's why I shared that directly with members of the committee so that they could gain that extra background. But Emma, I think you've got some more to share with us now.
Sorry, Chair's a little slow coming off mute there. Yeah, absolutely. Somewhere within the documentation, I was just frantically scrolling. I couldn't find it, but there is information within this report in terms of backlog maintenance costs for the 3 schools that are referred to within the report today. I'm sure Marianne will know the figures probably off the top of her head, but on a wider strategic element, we're working with finance colleagues to understand the status quo versus transformation and the lifetime costs associated with that. We've got some more work to do, as I say, at that strategic level and right the way across the county, actually, not just in one or the other, on suggestions that we have as officers in respect of what the blueprint will look like for the county. We're keeping it at that strategic level. We can't have predetermination. You'll all be aware of that, but nevertheless, we've got an idea worked through in terms of the modelling that we've done. And yeah, it would be good actually in time. The intention will be, I think, next year to take it through finance panel. Jane will remind me of the timescales because there is still a little more work that we need to do. And notwithstanding the work around the funding, you'll scrutinise on Friday, aren't you? The funding formula, I think.
Yes.
So what we would need to do is, if the new funding formula is agreed, we need to rerun that through the figures so that we've got the latest information. But nevertheless, yeah, absolutely, Councillor Michael, we can bring forward then the results of that work so that people can understand it across the whole county. So far, so good, so to speak.
I find that very encouraging, Chair. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lucy, and that's the last comment. Then, unless she asks the same question as me, which is possible, we'll wrap up after.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question about the transport costs, because I think in the report it suggests that there is no additional transport costs, and I accept that if there are only 50 pupils who actually should be in the Craddock catchment, then there aren't going to be as many pupils moving around as perhaps we might have initially thought. But nevertheless, that's still 50 pupils who need to be transported. Are we assuming that the high school provision will be sufficient to cater for the additional primary school children?
Can I come in?
Yes.
There's already the high school site and the site that we're proposing in respect of sort of housing the new school in phase 2 are one and the same. They would be next door to one another. And the buses are already travelling down from and within the catchment area. So it might be that you need to change the size of the bus rather than put on more buses. But I understand this capacity based on the buses that are travelling down now. So we don't envisage there to be any significant additional cost in terms of transport.
Thanks for that, Emma. And come back, Lucy.
Yeah, just I mean, I'm guessing that although personally I've had experience of primary school children travelling on a high school bus and no issues at all, that might be something that the community may have concerns about.
Yeah, and there are within the Brecon area. I talk with local knowledge in respect of tending the school. There are primary school children on some of the buses now waiting at the end of the day for the high school pupils to finish and then obviously make their way home, and vice versa the other end of the day. So there is experience of that within the catchment already, Councillor Lucy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And now, Lucy, you surprised me. It wasn't the question I was half expecting from you. So my question is, what is Plan B if planning falls? There are a lot of hoops to go through to get to the point where we are able to build. So if we were to find problems on the site that meant it impossible for us to go ahead with the Penland site, what is Plan B so that we don't get stuck in the position that phase 1 has been completed and phase 2 cannot go ahead?
If I could start, and maybe Marianne will come in with more of her experience around building. We've kept the pen. Now I can't remember the exact terminology, but working with the Brecon Beacons National Park, we've kept the categorisation of the site the same in order to allow us to build a school, because it's the site that the high school was previously located on and has subsequently been demolished. So the risk is minimal based on the fact that we've kept that category and been working with the national parks in relation to that. I appreciate that doesn't answer your question though, Councillor Pete. And so I think then I'll hand to Marianne, but ordinarily you would look at another site.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Emma. To be honest, you know, we've had a high school up on the site for many, many years. We've got the college facility on the site. We've got the leisure centre and the new high school and the primary school, sort of all closely located. So the opportunities for this to become a real exciting campus type model is there for us. In terms of a plan B, yes, if there were issues with the site that we couldn't address, and usually, you know, with many of these things, if there are issues, they can be mitigated in terms of developments and planning, etc. But if there wasn't, as Emma said, we'd need to look for another site. But you know, we are confident that early engagement with planners here as well, and bringing expert planners onto the consultancy team right from the beginning will help address things from a very, very early stage. Okay,
thanks. It's not quite complete reassurance, because you can't say plan B where the new site would be. And I agree with you, the risk on the planning side is perhaps lower than people might initially think. But I would like to see a little bit more certainty around that, because end of phase one is possibly the worst of all worlds, and we need some clearer, I think, assurance on phase two. I don't think you can give it to me today, though.
Probably not today. But yeah, we hear what you're saying. But our plan is, that site is where we really want to build this new school, part of a campus development up there. But yes, I hear what you're saying about potentially needing to look at a plan B.
And if we'd have gone ahead and got planning for a school there, we might have been predetermined. Yeah, I think we've got to be careful with everything we do, can't we? So it is one of them scenarios.
Phil, I completely understand. I wasn't expecting us to have planning in place. I was perhaps hoping for a little bit more assurance in terms of the indicative discussions that have been had with planners in the park, and Marianne's alluded to some of that. I think that there is a degree of assurance there that we can respond accordingly. I would have liked a little bit more, but I don't think we're going to get it. So does anyone, therefore, I'm not seeing any final hands from committee. Do any officers want to come in with any final comments that they may have on any of the issues that we've raised now that they've been able to research a little bit more while we've been talking? Emma's indicating.
Yeah, please, Chair, if I could just come back on your final comment. We really are confident about being able to build a school on the Penland site. And so therefore we've not looked for problems, or don't believe we necessarily need a plan B at this stage, because it was a school until recently. It's recently been demolished. We've worked with Brecon Beacons National Park in terms of their development plan. We've worked with them and our own planners in respect of keeping the school within the appropriate, or keeping the site within the appropriate categorization to allow us to develop a school. So we've mitigated the risk as far as we possibly can. On that basis, I can't see that there's anything else that we could have actually done, and I don't feel that there's a need for us to do anything else at this stage, because all of the mitigations that we've taken and all the discussions we've had have been so positive.
You obviously haven't done enough, Emma, because you haven't significantly supported Scrutiny to be aware of that.
I'll do better.
Well done. Thank you.
I was just about to say thank you, Emma, for that clarification, because it pulls everything together in a clear assurance that we can respond to. Thank you for that. Lynette, do you have any final comments, and for that matter, Councillor Phil, do you have any final comments about things that you've heard today that you might like to expand on, or any closing comments about the proposal itself?
No, just to thank you today for your time and taking us in the Scrutiny Committee, going through everything. I think we've answered, we've your queries and concerns today. I think the Scrutiny has been effective, and I think we will have sufficient information to report to Cabinet for the decision next week. So thank you to Scrutiny. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynette. Councillor Phil, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, no, the same lines as Lynette, really, and really encouraged from some of the comments that we've had today, because it is, as was suggested, it could be a really exciting project that could be something really special, and I believe in it, and the officers believe in it. I know we have to, and I appreciate the way that Scrutiny look at the consultation response and pick out the issues that are raised, but actually there's a huge amount of positive measures that can be here that can benefit the future learners for this catchment. And I just think it's a really good project that deserves the support, and I hope to see it open in 25-26. It would be good. Thank you.
In which case, thank you, Councillor Phil. Thank you, officers. Members of the committee, as I said, we're going to spend a few minutes talking through what we've heard today, so that we've got a clear steer from the committee for me to take to Cabinet next Tuesday. So thank you, officers, Phil, for your time today, and Councillor Allard as well, who's been sitting in case we had any transport specific problems. Although I think whilst his icon is still up, I think he had to leave us a few minutes ago. So thank you all. If members can just wait a minute, and then we'll take stock. Thank you to officers. Thank you everyone for staying on. Does anyone have any comments before I ask Wyn to go through the things that I highlighted to him during the session? Councillor Lucy.
Hi, Pete. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we're absolutely confident that the figures for the catchments are correct, because that makes a huge difference. I think, if we're looking at only 50 children actually living within the Craddock catchment, and our aim is that all the primary school provision across the county is good enough that people won't feel the need to move from one school to another, then that's not, 50 children moving to another school isn't really an issue. But if there were 100 children who were living within the Craddock catchment, then that would be sufficient to sustain a school going, into the future. And I would have more concern about the idea of moving those children into Brecon.
Yeah, I can't remember which response, but within the consultation report, there was a breakdown of where the pupils come from, and Emma was consistent with that. And it was also within the Brecon catchment review documentation that if I can't remember the exact figures, but it is approximately 50% of the pupils are moving out of predominantly the Priory area. So that would be the area around Uplands, Beech Grove, that part of Brecon. So yeah,
22% were coming in from the Priory area.
Yeah, so it's quite a significant element that are taking the sort of 2-3 mile drive to get there. Does anyone else have any other observations? Angela.
Yeah, hi. So really all my queries were covered by others, but I think the sticking plaster is what has been said is phase 2. So to me, it makes perfect sense to amalgamate the infants and primary school of Mount Street. And I don't think there would really be any contest to that. But adding Craddock to it is only really a viable project if they have the one site. And that was the question, although answered very well. We haven't been given 100% assurance because 100% assurance can't be given. So it's a sort of chicken and egg, isn't it?
I think
we haven't got that assurance. We don't know that's going to happen. There's no guarantee at all that they will get the funding or the planning permission or that will ever go ahead. So yeah, that's my issue.
I think by taking the funding from Band B, there is more assurance, because with the original conversations, it looked like it was going to be a bid for Band C, which hasn't been announced yet. So there was much more risk. So in that respect, I'm more assured about the funding, and I'm also more assured about the impact on the financial viability of the council, because it's already factored in to the financial planning of the council. I had big concern previously that we were adding to the debt burden with stuff that has not come before council within a budget cycle before. That will be a problem potentially for other applications, but things will have moved on by then. I think that has to be one of the caveats that I have to give to Cabinet, that is still a risk that we are concerned about, and that they need to consider. I think we've had assurance, but we can't have 100% assurance. And
no.
Emma's contribution, clarifying and drawing together all the assurance, actually was quite helpful.
Yeah, I felt today's session was much more positive and, how can I say, factual than a previous session we had that felt accusatory and defensive. I felt this was a better session myself. Yeah, thank you, Pete.
Yeah, I mean, Angela, I totally agree with that, and I suppose it's partly because there was a sense I had that it was well structured. I mean, obviously we had 744 pages to have gone through, but it's quite a complex project that I felt going through each of the proposals there was more and clearer information on, albeit Councillor Amanda raised an interesting point about some of the sequencing or some of the options that perhaps hadn't been fully considered, and I accept that I'd missed that too. So that was pertinent, but I just felt it was a little bit more comprehensive, and I got a bit more assurance, certainly when I was putting the questions to them on areas that genuinely I felt I wanted more information on, and that they could reasonably better explain next week, more importantly to Cabinet, before they reached a decision. I thought that was forthcoming and clear. So yes, the tempo was better, albeit I did upset Phil at the end. I wasn't trying to score a political point. I was just raising a general question about managing complex budgets and making them too complicated. But there we have it. I think it was much better, Pete, and I think we probably have, once Wynne comes back, got some clear points to go forward.
It was definitely easier to. It was definitely easier to pull recommendations out during the meeting, and there was stuff that was quite clear that needed additional comment or needed observation on. Councillor Amanda.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Sorry. Yeah, I think they addressed my queries quite robustly as well. So I think it was worth raising, and if that reasoning is able to go in the papers to Cabinet, then I think it's worth putting it in, both from the reason why they haven't pursued that option in terms of the costs of rebuilding a school for just 50 pupils, but also their willingness to learn from lessons from projects elsewhere in the county came across well, and it's worth mentioning that at every stage in order to mitigate the transition.
Yeah, I think there is a lot to be learnt from the Welsh Pool experience, and I think there is also probably a lot to be learnt in the interim period from the Federation up around Glanturmin, the Llanbrynmawr Carno, where you have got teachers working across 3 sites that are even further apart than this one. Angela.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add to admit or confess that my heart sinks when we get these massive documents. You know, the last one was 500 odd pages. This one was 700 odd pages. And when I get the email, I think, oh, crikey, I don't want to read this. But I will say, having all that information in advance, I think, is more beneficial, because it just gives us the chance to tease out these issues. Previously, we've had some quite short reports, and we've had to spend all our time in scrutiny filling in the gaps. And the one comment I've made previously is that when officers have been a little bit careless and perhaps the information wasn't up to date or correct, it does undermine their whole project, when in actual fact it might be just that little bit of information that was wrong. So I think for myself, I have more confidence in the officers when we have a more robust set of papers in advance, as much as I hate trawling through them. So I wonder if that's why the session then goes so much smoother, because we have all the information and we've got our questions prepared. But yeah, it was a good session. Thank you, Pete.
There's a lot to be said for that. I think there's also a lot of praise that I don't think I've actually ever given in a session to the members of the public in the areas of all of these proposals, in how they have responded to the consultation in a detailed manner, raised issues that we as Scrutiny, because not all of us know the areas concerned, they've given us the information with which to scrutinise these proposals in some detail. I know when I've gone through them, my heart doesn't quite sink, Angela, but where it does sink is where I see lots of comments showing just how much passion there is for these individual schools. But actually they're issues that we can't really address because of the school's code and how the process actually works. I'm reminded very much about the planning process, and it has so many similarities to that, where the public will see things one way, but members of planning committee have to work within the rules in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm encouraged by this proposal, though, in terms of and I think we ought to recognise this in our report, that the responses from officers to the consultation document itself, to the members of the public, seems to be a little bit more considered. Some of those have previously I felt they've been a bit brusque and haven't given due care. This felt better. I think we should respond to that. Okay, let's try and, because we were aiming to finish at past, let's try and draw together our conclusions. I think looking at what is in front of us and how all of us have responded, my feeling here is that the case, provided we reach phase 2, the case has been made by officers in this instance. Do people agree with that?
Yes, I agree with you, Chair.
I agree.
There are some issues around the community that I need to highlight to Cabinet, particularly around the impact on the early years setting at Craddock, and the loss of focus to the village because of the loss of the school hall. And just as previously we've encouraged support from economic development to support a village hall where a school has gone, I think this time we need to be strongly encouraging any transfer to another department and regeneration of the site, if that is what happens, to look to see how a community hall type facility can be incorporated into those plans. We can't mandate it because it would be another department bringing it forward, but we can strongly encourage Cabinet to look for that. Is that, I think, the best that we can come up with to address those concerns that came through in the consultation? I'm happy for people to come up with stronger suggestions or different suggestions in that respect. Sarah, do come in.
Hi, Pete. Sorry, I just added it in the chat, actually. It was just to say we talk about the early provision as that's under the education, the foundation phase, but it's also the loss of the childcare offer and the wraparound care that's provided.
Okay, thanks for that. And Wynne, can you note that to make sure that's how it's represented? Are there any other things people want added in? Wynne, can you go through the other things that I asked to go into the report while we were in the meeting?
Sure, bear with me. Let me just flick back to the top of my notes here.
Sorry, you must have an absolute stack of notes from that.
It's quite long, to put it mildly.
You're a fast typist.
Yes, and sometimes the words in the right order, you never know. That's right. There was one about the option and why you've been discounted, which is what Councillor Amanda was talking about.
Yeah.
There's another one, information from Marianne to be available before they take the decision. What was that?
That one's a recommendation that will be in the report rather than something that I highlight.
That was the lessons learned one. That's right.
Yeah.
About the experience from Welsh Pool. So you just need that sort of background information.
We need that as a recommendation, though, that it is brought to scrutiny.
Yes.
Potentially as a means of helping the new committee in May establish itself. So that does need to be an action that goes in.
There's another recommendation there about scrutiny being assured about the transport and the redefinition of the catchment, which includes then the Craddock area.
Yeah, I think we got assurance from the officers that the catchment for the new build at Penlan Phase 2, that the catchment will include the Craddock Epping area.
Right. Yes.
Rather than them being directed towards Priory as their closest school.
Yeah.
I think that is a very important commitment. And I think I want that in there so that we tie, if it doesn't go in into the Cabinet report, we tie it in.
Yes.
Because I don't want to be in a position where Craddock pupils are almost pushed into Priory and unable to access the school that is the replacement for their school.
Yeah.
Without a huge burden on parents for transport costs.
And the next one is the indicative figures of a formula change on the impact in terms of savings, etc.
Yeah, that's a straight recommendation.
Yes.
I'm surprised we're not going to have that for Friday anyway. And it might be something we want to explore on Friday.
Yeah. There's another one then about it's an assurance, this one again, about the number of early years places not being reduced in Brecon and Craddock area.
Yeah. I think
that's probably about it, I think. But I'll pick out anything else then salient from the other parts of the notes, and I've obviously picked up a few of the comments at the end about the Banby funding, the risk, the better information, responses from officers, the case has been made, and then about the community impact. So I'll include all of that as well.
Yeah, I think right at the end when we were getting shorter on time, I wasn't picking out so much straight away because I was expecting you to pick up on it. But I think the last 20, 25 minutes, I think there was a lot there that we need to tie into the report.
Yeah.
So that it's tied in and the cabinet have it in front of them so that they're committing to that as well as the main report.
Yeah.
There's a lot of you asked questions today. Thank you for that. Are there any other recommendations or specifics that you want included within the report as a result of the questions that you asked? Councillor Lucy. If you're talking, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, it's not another question, but just in relation to Ian McIntosh's comment that his response to the consultation wasn't included in the cabinet report. I don't know whether there's anything that we need to do about that.
The reports that come to scrutiny on previous ones haven't had any comments from the local member. We've had comments from the local member because they've submitted them to us themselves. What the report that comes to us is the almost the report to scrutiny, and hasn't previously included the local member comments. The assumption being that the local member will be listening to scrutiny and responding after. I know that Councillor John did it the other way round in Llanbeda. Councillor Howell, in respect of Dolly, listened to scrutiny and then put his comments in, having heard officers' responses to scrutiny. So it has varied from each different one.
Chair, I had a sort of side conversation via email during the meeting with Emma Palmer, and she did reassure me there that although we didn't see the comments, they will be going to Cabinet in their entirety next week. So Councillor Ian will not be disadvantaged in presenting his comments in full or otherwise to Cabinet next week.
Thanks for that, Jake. Does anyone have any other final comments, final observations? Okay, in which case, Wynne, do you have everything that you need from us? Oh, sorry, Angela.
Well, mine is just want to check dates and times for our next meetings, because I've got a little bit confused the number of meetings we've had booked, cancelled and times changed as to where we are.
That's fine. I was about to move on to that because I was going to say, Wynne, have you got everything that you need for this item? And if you have, can you go through the forward work programme for us as our last piece of formal business?
Yeah, sure, Chair. No, I got everything for this one. I'm quite happy. As far as the work programme's concerned, bear with me. Let me get back to the agenda.
Yeah, I'm trying to find my agenda as well.
We've got a meeting on Friday starting at, I think it's 3 o'clock now. It's been moved, unfortunately, because there's been several clashes on Friday. So it's 3 o'clock till 5 on Friday to do the funding formula, and then the work programme is as set out on the agenda now for the next couple of months. There may need to be, as you can see there, another meeting February, March, if another school proposal comes back, which needs to go to Cabinet before the March cut-off date, which I think now is going to be the 20th of March, when the pre-election period starts. And as you can see, after March, we won't have any meetings for a couple of months until June, because obviously there's other things going on. And then we'll have training, etc., for the first couple of months of the new council, and then we'll start the schedule again from June onwards and the new committee will obviously have to devise its new annual programme then when it's in place. So nothing additional to add really, Chair, to what's there.
So
Thanks
can I
very much.
just check then? Sorry, Chair. The scrutiny training on question technique then Friday morning is now cancelled.
No, that's actually going ahead at 10 o'clock for 2 hours. So that's
Right.
still going ahead, and that's being facilitated by Welsh Local Government Association. We'll be doing that for 2 hours, and then we've got the scrutiny meeting in the afternoon.
Okay, and can I just check again then, because we get some training sent through from Carol, but I don't get that to my personal email. It only comes to this email, and I only look on this computer when we've got a meeting. So I missed several briefing sessions in November and December, and I've just had notification of a health and care committee, but can I confirm that's not for me?
It is for you. It is for all members of this committee. I spoke to Councillor Peter about this. There's a briefing on, and it's part of a consultation on the North Powys Wellbeing project, which is on the 16th, I think it is, in the morning. And all members of Learning and Skills have been invited to attend because you are also a part of the consultation because there's a school involved in the project site.
Okay, and then there's another member development on the 17th of January. So have I got them all then?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay.
But things change on a fairly regular basis, Angela. So
okay, so perhaps I'll message Carol and ask her to add my other email address to that notification.
Normally, as you know, I'd send you a notification to your other one as well, just to make sure you do cover all the bases. But if you pick that up with Carol, I'd be grateful as well.
Fab, thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Jake?
So am I to understand then that before the PERDA date of the 20th of March, we'll probably get back the Welsh Pool learning report that was alluded to us having in March? And is it likely that we'll get the Dolly closure consultation before that PERDA date, or do we not know that yet?
We don't see Dolly again. That's our part done. The one that we may be getting is a school Broconflaith up in the far north of the county.
Okay, so Dolly's cabinet at whatever point.
Dolly, the report on the statutory notice goes back to cabinet. We have finished our involvement with the Dolly process.
Okay, and just while I've got my hand up and mic up, Pete, I think I'm going to struggle for Friday now with the change. I know I've accepted the meeting, so what I'll do, if that's all right, read the papers and forward to you and Wyn any observations that that I have on the funding formula in advance.
Thanks for that, Jake. In which case, and draw the meeting formally to a close. Wyn will take us offline, and then we'll just have a couple of minutes reflection on anything that we could do to improve the process from this meeting.